Now for the oil tanker I've got a very simple plan, particularly because I'm doing this solo. It's going to have to be pretty methodical, so it seems logical I'll start by spawning at the bow spawn point, make my way up the gantry so I can have an overview of the upper deck area and hopefully be able to pick off any of the guards that I see on this upper deck before making my way down to the midsection and cross the midsection gantry. And there's a lot of obstructions in the superstructure here, so there may be some guards hiding in these areas here, so hopefully I'm going to take a wide and safe route round here so I don't get surprised to this point, which is the outer gantry stairway leading up the superstructure. My plan here is to start from the top at the bridge, enter the bridge, and then work my way down the interior stairways, checking each floor in the ship until I eventually reach the engine room, which is about here. By this time I should have cleared, fingers crossed, the whole of the ship. Right, well here we are on the bow spawn of the oil tanker, making our way up to the main deck here. We'll just have a peek over. The idea, of course, at this point is I pick off as many of the enemies as I can while they're out in the open before getting to the harder bit of the map, which is the interior. Of course, we have to contend with a lot of these obstructions, like these shipping crates and all the machinery on the deck, which are all great hiding places for the AI. So we just have to be very careful as we make our way down the ship. While this gameplay is playing along here, I'm going to give a quick overview of my opinions of the game thus far. Now, I've only been playing it a couple of weeks, and really within that couple of weeks, most of the time has been taken up with setting up my key bindings, getting used to the controls and getting used to how the player models work. And so I can't say that I'm an expert in this game. There's other people that have been playing it a lot longer than I have, but I have to say that thus far, even though this is a work in progress in early access, I've really been enjoying it. It seems to be exactly what I particularly want, and the pace is just right for me. Now, that doesn't mean that the pace is going to be right for everyone. It isn't. And in fact, I've been kind of canvassing some of my other friends and saying, are you interested in playing this game? And they've given me a few of their concerns about this particular type of game, this hardcore tactical shooter where, and this is one of the major concerns, when you're dead, you're dead. Because they've got used to this kind of COD or Battlefield format where you can respawn and respawn and respawn after you're killed and just get straight back into the game. The fact that you might have to sit out a round because you've been killed early on doesn't seem to appeal to some people. Now, the other concern that was voiced by some of our friends when I asked them about Ground Branch was the quality of the graphics. Now, obviously this is Unreal Engine 4 and they're currently playing games like Battlefield 1 or the latest CODs or other AAA games, so it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but I can see how they might be disappointed when they're coming from that level of graphics, which to them might seem like a little bit of a step backwards. That all said, I'm not an expert in graphic engines and certainly don't really know the full capabilities of the Unreal Engine 4, but all I can say is that this is a work in progress, and what I've seen so far is Blackfoot Studios have been striving constantly to improve the game as they go along, so you never know, we might see some sort of slight improvement in the graphics. However, having said all that, one thing I have to say is this particular map, the oil tanker, is perhaps the weakest graphically from the selection of maps that Ground Branch has in its offline play at the moment. I've had a quick look at some of the other maps, and there's some very nice ones, some nice forest ones with some lovely foliage that look really, really good. This one, the oil tanker, as you look at it, some of the textures are very flat and not very three-dimensional. Now, what does that all mean from the point of view of how good a game this actually is? Well, when you take into consideration this is a little bit of a niche game, this hardcore tactical shooter, where people have come from perhaps a background of the original Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon, it doesn't matter as much as it might do in some other games. And speaking personally, I have to say that the graphics are kind of secondary to gameplay for me. Well, we finally seem to have found where the enemy's been hiding, right at the back of this upper deck. So we should get a little bit of an idea now about how the AI is playing. And as you'll be able to see, it's not the smartest AI in the world. But there again, it's not fully fleshed out in the way of programming yet. Now, as you can see, it's a bit of a mixed bag as to how well the AI is behaving here. It sometimes makes use of cover quite well, but fails to really move dynamically enough for me. And what I mean by that is it won't pop back into cover when it comes under fire, or won't move from one area of cover to another. In other words, fire and maneuver from one place to another. The other thing I'd possibly like it to see is when the AI is actually caught out in the open, it'll actually go prone to minimise the target area it presents to you. And also, I'd like to see the AI retreating to cover or moving backwards into better cover. But of course, this is early days, and this might very well be implemented at some point anyway. Now, the outer windows on this ship have been a little bit of a problem for me. Now, why couldn't that guy see me? As you can see, what I really should have done there was switch to fully automatic, because you need a few rounds just to break the window before you pierce the window and start taking out targets on the inside. Now, this is a very big map, so what I'm going to do is speed through some of these more mundane sections. With this many decks to check through, this will save us quite a lot of time. Well, we've made it all the way up to the bridge, which affords us a fairly nice, if somewhat unrealistic, view of what I've managed to achieve on the main deck. It kind of flatters my abilities as a player, really. And now the hard bit, the interior of the ship, and working our way down through all the various decks. Now, there's about 7 floors altogether before we get down to our main objective, which is the engine room. Now, that's a lot of corridors and rooms to work our way through. So what I'm going to do is speed up the footage until we get to some real action. Now, as we make our way down through these stairways, it's another opportunity to note the rather simplistic graphical textures that make up the ship's model. They're functional enough, but from my point of view, they certainly lack a little bit of atmosphere. It would have been kind of nice to have seen some more supplementary environmental effects and textures, like flickering lights or steam leaking from pipes and conduits, active computers, or wear and stains on the surfaces like the floor and the walls. And by the way, where's all the crew? Now, that was a door opening, so there's clearly enemy here. However, I don't think that was the guy that's just come through that door. No, it wasn't. So obviously there's a guy at the other side of that door, which makes it a bit risky for me to try and enter. So what I'm trying to do here is remember whether you can fire through doors or not. Well, I give it a try anyway, and the answer to that is no, so I'm going to have to think about whether there's a way of getting into that room, maybe through that other door over there, so I can flank the guy that's waiting for me. In the meantime, we'll see what's in the other rooms and try and clear the rest of the floor before we get to that tricky entry. Now, that's another slight weakness in the AI at the moment. The fact that there's AI waiting inside random rooms to surprise you is great, but the fact that he was waiting in the middle of that room with his back to the door wasn't very realistic at all. And that seems to be the guy that was waiting on the other side of that door, so there was another way into that room, the galley. Again, he didn't seem to actually be looking at the door or taking a tactical position, waiting for someone to enter through that door. Okay, once again, rather than subject you to a lot of fruitless searching through all these rooms and corridors, we'll fast forward here and make our way down through the last few decks until we get to our main objective, which is the engine room. That's below deck 1. Now, at this point I found these stairs a little bit tricky because they're so steep, so even with me crouching, the chances are if there's any enemy, they'll see me before I see them. And to make matters worse, we've got some very sharp reverse corners here to try and peek around without getting spotted. Now, at this point, we've only got one enemy left, so the tension's kind of like building for me, because you always know it's that last guy that's going to get you. So I'm being overcautious perhaps here, rather than being aggressive. And I'm going back down the other stairs to see if I can see across the room to see if the guy is waiting for me just round these blind corners. Now there's something, I kind of mentioned this earlier about supplementary special effects, and I've forgotten that there is actually a couple of these down in the engine room. You'll notice the steam coming through the pipes and yes, off the engine as well. These are the kind of little touches that I think are really, really nice and bring a map alive. I wish they'd included a few more things like that to make it look less like a kind of film set, a bit sort of flat and prefabricated, and a little bit more alive. Now, I am getting a little bit nervous here, because I am absolutely positive at this point that this last guy must just be below me on the lower deck here. So I'm just trying to craftily peek over all these gantry rails here to see if I can see him before he sees me, because you're always sure that any minute now you're just going to hear that one last crack of a bullet and that's you finished, which is a bit gut-wrenching when you're that close to finishing the mission. Now at this point, having checked the engine room and he's not here, I'm beginning to get a very nasty feeling that I may have missed him. There's only a tiny bit of stun to check, but if he's not there, I'm afraid it's all the way back to the beginning to start another check. Now, at this point in the game, it wasn't only very frustrating because I would have thought that the game would have been over successfully by now, but it was also extremely nerve-wracking because my way of thinking was, If I hadn't found him the first time round, he must be in a particularly good hiding place. So if I'm going to go searching for him again, knowing my luck, he was going to get the drop on me this time round. Well, here we are again, back on the main deck after a completely fruitless second search of the interior of the ship. I just didn't know where this guy was hiding. He must have been inside a funnel or something, because I had no joy on this second time round. The only thing I could think of doing was having one more try. Well, I was back up on the bridge and I'm resorting to scanning the main deck with my binoculars. I just cannot find this Houdini of an AI bot. He's either the Invisible Man or Ant-Man. Back again on the main deck. Now I'm getting distraught at this point because the timer is ticking down. You've only got 60 minutes to complete this mission, and I really I'm at the end of my tether. The reason I'm back on the main deck again is because I was so desperate I thought I'd do a body count, but sure enough there was still one guy missing. So at this point I just surrendered.